Researchers just performed some more meta-analysis that indicates that immigrants don't actually make major metropolitan areas more unsafe. So this is a new study that focuses on 40 years worth of data. And it was published in the Journal of Ethnicity and Criminal Justice. And it's actually a really important piece of work to talk about because in the media and in this new administration, there is this idea that we need to close our borders because we need to keep the country safe. These immigrants pose a danger to national security. But actually, studies, not just this one, but studies previously indicated that that's not the case. Now let's talk about the recent study. So the previous data showed that foreign-born residents of the US were less likely to commit crimes than native-born Americans. The new study looked at 200 major metropolitan areas as defined by the US Census Bureau. The researchers then used census data and FBI crime reporting data from 1970 to 2010 to look at trends for these regions. So there's the methodology. Now, what exactly did they look at? They looked at things like property crime, but they also looked at violent crimes, including rates of murder, non-negligent manslaughter, aggravated assault, robbery, burglary, and larceny. So what were the results? The researchers found that communities undergoing a demographic change due to immigration clearly don't experience significant increases in crime. In fact, even though these communities may feel like they were in flux due to population changes, crime was either stable or declined in communities that were incorporating many immigrants. The most striking finding came from the authors' model for violent crime, murder, and robbery. The authors found that in 3 out of 4 statistical models, an increase in the percentage of foreign-born residents was significantly associated with decreases in these types of crimes. So there's a little more to the study, but I want to give you guys a chance to chime in.
So Trump famously said they're criminals and rapists coming into this country. And it turns out, no, on average, we're the criminals. and so it gives you a sense, like some folks thought, like, that's not that big a deal. He's just saying, yeah, you know, the guys coming over are more likely to be criminals. First of all, as you can see here, he's statistically incorrect. But it is a big deal because if you reversed it and you said Americans are criminals and rapists, no, but on average, they're more criminals and rapists and murderers than immigrants are, the folks that are here already, you'd be pretty pissed, wouldn't you? I mean, if somebody came out and said Americans are criminals and rapists, we would probably launch the next day, right? Mm-hmm. We would be furious about it. And so, of course, it's offensive, and of course, it's incorrect.
We are furious, and the places where they say that are the places we actually are attacking right now, you know? Like, when people do say that about Americans. But I follow the logic. I mean, yes, some, like, Mexicans are rapists and murderers, and some Americans are rapists and murderers, so we should build a wall around every American. Not only will this keep the immigrants safe, but it'll also keep the Americans safe from each other. It's just a simple proposal I've developed in the last 18 seconds.
I think it's really interesting that the same people in Congress who continuously argue that immigrants and the others are, you know, compromising our safety are the same people who consistently vote against things like the Violence Against Women Act, the same members of Congress who refuse to do anything about prison rape or rape in the military. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you really genuinely care about crime and making sure that you keep everyone safe? They don't really care about those things. I think they use the argument of crime, despite the data that's here, despite the data that's been around for decades now, because they want to divide people and they just hate the others, and they want to find some excuse, any excuse, to garner enough public support and public opinion to close our borders and shun these people as if they're, you know, the disease of the planet. It makes me so angry. The people that are actually making us the most unsafe are the people in Congress who refuse to do anything about real crime that's taking place in this country right now.
Yeah, and it's all about relatability, because if all these immigrants were doing these things, would we in California not be the ones who to experience it the most, considering the fact that we've been the highest for allowing immigrants to come in, and consistently after, 12 to 13 years, data shows that we're still ranked the highest as for 2012, in the same way with New York, who vote for Democratic, because it's all about being relatable. If you know that immigrant that maybe lives on your street that you're friends with and you start to relate to, you're not going to buy into as easily these misconceptions that everyone feeds. And it plays further into the narrative that went into the Brexit vote as well. When you look at, I brought this up the last time we talked about immigrants as well. That's why I love this data has been around. It's not new. It doesn't just come up after an election. Like those that voted predominantly to leave the to leave the European Union, 80% of them believed it was because they wanted to take their country back. Very similar to what happened in the US. When those areas that voted predominantly to leave had the lowest amount of immigrants in that area. Severely low in comparison to places like London, who voted to remain part of the European Union. So it's all about, it's so much easier to persuade someone actually when you think about it when they can't relate to anything. You're like, well, the reason why you have unemployment rate in your area and the reason why things aren't going as well for you is because those people are taking your jobs. And they're like, oh, absolutely, that's right. That's the reason my problems are happening right now. It's nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with everything else. Let's just put the blame on someone.
It has nothing to do with the system of government we have in place right now and how that system is rigged against them. And again, these are typically the people who will look at the poorest individuals in the country who need government assistance and say, they won't take personal responsibility for their failures. Okay, well then why don't you take some personal responsibility, actually learn about what's happening in government right now, and learn why your jobs were shipped to other countries and why there's so much unemployment in your area.
The logic behind saying like, oh, illegal immigrants are criminals. Well, okay, you just called them illegal. Like you defined them as illegal. So, by your definition, yes, they're criminal. And this shows that there's not a high level of criminality among them. Because if you just snuck into America and if they find you, they'll send you back, you'd want to lay low for a while, wouldn't you? You'd want to follow every single rule.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's the logic. And I think that's something that's easy to grasp. So let go of they're illegal, so they're criminal branch, because that's just semantics, and grab onto the one that actually would apply to you. Because if you were trying not to get noticed, you probably wouldn't commit any crimes.
So to Brett's point, and I don't know if this is biased of me, but whenever I see someone driving really slow in LA, I'm like, undocumented immigrant. He's like, I ain't getting pulled over and sent out. Right? So, and speaking of bias, you should ignore everything that Francis said. He's enormously biased because he is
an immigrant.
He's an immigrant, right? And it's the Scottish are taking over this country.
Don't you guys feel alarmed and don't you feel like your safety has been violated by? I know.
I'll feel a lot safer once I see his documents.
Yeah. By the way, again, just think about if he had said it about the Scottish instead of the Mexicans. The Scottish are largely criminals and rapists. What? It would be like, what?
You see what that guy William Wallace did? He did that to those people.
And by and large, the trend over the length of these studies is that violent crime is going down. So you might say, oh, well, of course it's lower in places that have more immigration because the crime stats are lower everywhere. But that they took that into consideration. They controlled for it and found that actually in areas with more immigrants, the crime is lower than places with less immigrants.
And so one other interesting finding from this study that I want to mention. And by the way, they actually conducted two different types of studies. One of them was the meta-analysis that I talked about, where they look at data, that's been compiled from other studies, other research. And then they also did their own study looking at data from the FBI and the census. Now, one other thing that they focused on was property crime. And what I found interesting was that rates of property crime declined more rapidly in cities with high percentages of foreign-born residents than they did in cities with low percentages of foreign-born residents. So I think that kind of hits your point, Brett, about how if you're here and you're not supposed to be here, you're not going to be like hitting up people's houses or like breaking into their cars. You know.
And also, we're so poor, there's nothing to steal.
And by the way, foreign-born residents are not necessarily undocumented immigrants. Like I'm a foreign-born resident, and on average, the foreign-born residents. So is Francis, obviously.
Two of them.
Yeah,
they're everywhere.
Yeah, I know. Turkey and Scotland are sending us their worst. Okay, but on average, again, a little bit of a stereotype, but borne out by a lot of data, the foreign-born residents work harder. So they're busting their ass. And so I'm not saying that Americans are lazy. No, I'm kidding.
It's not just that, though, Jake. It's not just that. Okay, the way our immigration, if you want to be a legal immigrant, it's not like you show up to the United States and the government's like, we're not going to look into you at all. We're just going to make you a U.S. citizen. No, they bet the fuck out of you, right? And so whether it's undocumented or documented, Documented immigrants are vetted. You know, they have to pass tests. They have to be here for a certain amount of time. They have to prove themselves. These are not violent individuals who are here to cause trouble. These are people who have probably left their countries in search of better opportunities for themselves and their families, if not to come here and avoid, getting murdered by whatever's happening in their own country.
And that's a great point. I'd love to reference really quick my own personal experience of this. Is the one point you mentioned is that it's not easy to go through the visa process, and it's definitely not cheap. You know how you're talking about all those immigrants that are coming in and taking your jobs and not paying taxes? The ones that, so you go through the process, on average, it's between $3,000 to $6,000 just to go through the process to get a visa. And then if you actually are able to get through the vetting system, which, by the way, I held a little class in my college, and I asked all the fellow Americans in the room to take the same test I did. Do you know how many passed out of a class of 32?
All of them, 100%.
One
We're number
person.
one.
The best damn
One
country
person.
in America.
One person passed the test, asking questions about what kind of fucking Ray-Bans George Washington wore. Like, it really goes down to the deepest questions you can imagine to make it so difficult for these people to try and go through the process, and not cheap as well. So
I would love to give Trump that test. There's no way he passes.
That's wrong.
He might go over, man.
Yeah.
That would be great. And
Set it up.
finally, to Anna's point about prison rape that she made a while back, it's amazing that like legislators, you'll say, "Hey, can you guys want to do something?" That's who cares, right? Well, if you're trying to prevent criminals and rapists, well, you'd have twofer there.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be a very efficient place to start if you actually cared about that issue. There's a post game to every Young Turks show. You can get that by being a member. tytnetwork.com/join.